Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our third-party risk management reports, right data, frequency, and content webinar. My name is Jessie Redmond, and I will be your host. On your screen, you should see multiple widgets that you can use, including Ask Questions, Media Player, Slides, Related Content, Speaker Bio, Request Demo, and Help. If you are unfamiliar with our webinars, all the widget boxes are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to maximize your screen space. At the bottom of your screen in the toolbar are icon buttons you can use to show and hide the widgets. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner of the widget. If you experience any issues or have technical questions, you can use the Help widget or submit them along with any other questions through the Ask Question widget. Don't worry, we do capture all questions throughout the session. We will answer some during the webcast, but those that we do not have a chance to answer live, we will address with you via email. Today's live session is eligible for 1 CPE credit. If you wish to receive this credit, please remember to be logged in individually with your own credentials, answer all 3 polling questions that appear on your screen during the presentation, be in attendance for the entire live 1-hour session, and complete the follow-up survey. We will send the link to the follow-up survey 24 hours after the live session concludes. If you meet all requirements, we will send your CPE certificate within 7 to 10 business days following survey submission. With us today, we have Raman Zachariah, Finminder's Chief Financial Officer. He will discuss the basics of third-party risk management reporting, what should be included in your reports, how often they should be distributed, and reporting best practices. You will see a link to a copy of today's slide deck, a link to our website, a link to our samples library, links to our How to Report Third-Party Risk Management activity to the board toolkit, our How to Get Support for Third-Party Risk Management, setting the tone from the top with the board and senior management infographic, how to develop metrics in your third-party risk management program infographic, as well as a link to a library of additional resources, all in the Related Content widget. With all that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Raman. Raman, the floor is yours.
Hey everyone, great to be with you all. We're just going to go over quickly here the session agenda for today's presentation. We'll first start with the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why of third-party risk management reporting. And then we'll dive into how often you should be reporting on your third-party risk management program and results, what information you should be including in your reporting, how different third-party risk management reporting metrics come to be and what they are, and then finally we'll summarize with some key takeaways. So let's jump right into the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. So we've simplified it here for you with a representative list, but from a perspective of the who, the people that are involved in third-party risk management reporting or have an input or output into it are the board of directors, your internal subject matter experts, management, your third-party risk management team, and other cross-functional organizations and units within the business, including folks like your internal audit function, if that exists. The what is the third-party risk management reporting helps confirm your compliance and provides your stakeholders with information so that they can make decisions. And the when is the cadence of which you want to do it. So some folks do it on a monthly, quarterly, or an even annual basis. So we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons and the considerations of each of those. Obviously, the where and the why. The where is that it's part of the governance part of the third-party risk management lifecycle, and why you have to do it is connected to that. So from a perspective of if you're a bank, credit union, or someone who has regulatory oversight, it's a requirement. But otherwise, it's a great best practice so that you can have good, proper governance and risk management and summary of your risk management to your cross-collaborative functions like your board of directors, your other team members internally. And having it done can help ensure that everyone's speaking from the same music sheet. Let's jump right into a little bit more about it. So the who, some of the stakeholders, as we discussed, are your board of directors who give management overall risk guidance and definition of your programs, and they hold everyone accountable for what is done from a third-party risk management execution and governance program perspective. They also receive and review regularly risk reporting from management or from internal folks that are in the day-to-day with third-party risk management. The subject matter experts, or the SMEs, are going to be the folks working cross-collaboratively to identify and evaluate areas of risk, specifically within due diligence. They could be someone like an information security analyst, a compliance analyst, or people in finance or legal. And then management are responsible for the execution of third-party risk management programs within the organization. They define the risk appetite, they report to the board of directors, they set the tone at the top. So they are reviewing and also acting on that reporting that comes out of that. To continue on, some other folks that are involved in teams and cross-functional parts of the organization that are involved. The third-party risk management team is a key, especially if it's defined. Many banks and credit unions and even other organizations outside of the financial institution space have started to define third-party risk management teams and dedicated resources for it. These are the folks that are going to be executing management and leadership's vision on third-party risk management programs. They're the ones who are going to define policies or reporting procedures, establish program reporting metrics, and then obviously generate and distribute those reports. And then other areas of the business, in terms of business lines and units, they are vendor owners oftentimes. They are responsible for executing some of the third-party management programs, such as loading vendors or getting vendor documentation, signing contracts, renewing contracts, and the sort. And then finally, internal audit teams, if they exist, will help evaluate the effectiveness of the third-party management program, among other things, within reporting of formal audits, identifying issues, and then remediations, and ensuring that those get wound up and put into the third-party management program reporting back to your board of directors and other key stakeholders. So let's jump right into some of the reporting metrics that are important to consider. So we've identified a handful within the next few slides, but to start, thinking about your vendor inventory. So vendor inventory is understanding how many vendors you have, but also what the risk level of each vendor is within your organization and how critical or non-critical these vendors are. So you should ask questions like, has your population of vendors grown, shrunk, or changed dramatically? How many critical vendors do you have today versus the period of last year? And then how does your full-time employee ratio against the vendor count you currently have compared to what it was last year? These are some KPIs you want to report upon. From a risk assessment standpoint, you'll want to make sure that you're performing due diligence and periodic risk assessments on a regular cadence on many vendors, that they're complete, and making sure that you refresh past due ones. Documenting is key in all things third-party risk, especially when you're thinking about third-party management reporting. So make sure that you document all of your risk assessments in some form or fashion that's standardized and easy to trace back from an audit trail perspective. And then finally, on this particular KPI reporting metric slide, program compliance. So are you ensuring that all of your business lines are working hand in hand and are working consistently to apply your procedures and policies on third-party risk management? Is there anything that's late from a deliverable perspective or due diligence? How many exceptions have there been and why? And then are these vendor risk assessments and performance monitoring that you're putting forth taking place on time and meeting your requirements? All of these things are important and some representative KPIs to be putting into your program reporting. Additionally, as we discussed, when you identify issues either through your risk assessments or through your due diligence on vendors, you want to report on them, both material and immaterial, but specifically those material issues should be reported on and monitored. You should be asking questions like, are there any remediation activities that we need to do, or are they delinquent or on time? Have any of our high risk or critical vendors had some sort of major event, a material adverse event, or some sort of breach that would negatively impact your operation and business continuity? Has there been any sort of negative news if you're monitoring these vendors? And then finally, you'll want to also look at new and emerging risks year over year or period over period on your third-party risk management program reporting. So are there new risks that were identified during the risk assessment stage if you did it earlier in the year or last year even? Are there emerging risks within an industry or organization or the vendor? And are there any new trends in vendor performance that merit any sort of action or remediation plan? And this, as you've seen in the past few years, is extremely important with the COVID pandemic, with supply chain issues, with bank failures. These are all key events that are material in nature that were new or emerging at the time of the disclosure. So keep these in mind and keep those types of processes in mind when you're creating a third-party risk management program reporting process. And to end with, obviously regulatory considerations are important, and then how you report and the timeline of which you report is also important. So making sure you're putting forth reporting that can pass your exams and your audits and also regulatory requirements. So if you're just starting on your third-party risk management program reporting processes, consider asking, have there any proposed regulatory updates or changes been made to the current guidance, and how do those changes affect your program, your reporting, your processes, and your governance? And then the timeline, the cadence of which you report on, can be agreed upon with many of your key stakeholders, as we've discussed. So making sure that you have a consistent timeline and it's documented, and that you produce whatever documents you need is critical to getting started and also continuing this with best practices. So by the numbers, from just some benchmarks that we see at VendMinder in practice, we work with over 1,200 customers currently, and we help them manage their vendor relationships and associated risks with these relationships. So of the 6,500 unique vendors that we have seen in our control assessment library over the past 12 months, and of the 23,000 assessments that we've completed on behalf of our customers on their vendors, between 80 to 85% of the report results are either confident, meaning low risk in nature, or satisfactory, meaning moderate risk or low moderate risk in nature, with 8 to 10% of those being cautious or high risk, and then the remaining 5 to 10 being in the vulnerable or severe risk category. Beyond that, on average, our customers have between 200 to 225 active vendors in their third-party risk management software platforms. Larger enterprise customers tend to have 500 to 550 vendors, while our mid-market and SMB customers tend to have anywhere between 140 to 150 active vendors on average. And then our bank and credit union customers, the ones that are highly regulated from the interagency guidance in particular, and the three bodies that oversee the US-based banks and credit unions, they tend to have anywhere between 170 to 180 active vendors, and those non-financial institution customers tend to have more vendors in their system at 270 to 280 on average. So now that we've talked about benchmarks and things that you want to manage, let's jump into understanding the nature of corporate governance. So corporate governance, as many of you probably are already aware, is a system of rules, practices, and processes by which an organization is directed and controlled. Again, it's typically defined by key stakeholders like your board of directors who influence it, but it helps to serve as a guidepost for how to balance the needs and interests of an organization's many stakeholders, such as the shareholders, executives, customers, vendors, investors, the government and regulatory bodies, and obviously also the community. So senior leadership acts on what the board of directors define on a governance structure basis. So you may be asking what the difference is between the board of directors and senior leadership. So here's a quick summary of the roles of each of those and how sometimes a board of director and a senior leadership line can be blurred because there are senior leadership members that oftentimes will serve on board of directors. But the board of directors are really the folks that define the mission and strategy of an organization. They are the ones who are appointing key management. They're providing oversight over the management and making sure that they read reports, especially those from third-party risk management, on vendor results and risks, to land at changes in governance structures or changes in strategy. Whereas the senior leadership typically would be the ones executing on all of these things, whether that be your third-party risk management program or even the strategy and mission that the board of directors defines holistically for the organization. So as we mentioned earlier, tone at the top, this is an important perspective because it goes hand in hand with your board of directors as well as your management team. But the phrase originally came from auditing firms that referenced an attitude of an organization's management towards effectiveness and making sure there's maintained internal controls and ethics being used. And this was following a lot of corporate accounting scandals, such as the ones that happened in the early 2000s with Enron, WorldCom, Adelphia, and ultimately led to the creation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which effectively popularized the term tone at the top. So tone at the top, effectively, in plain layperson's terms, can be defined as making sure that your management and your board of directors set effective governance structures and proper guidance on maintaining internal controls. But even more specifically, when you're talking about public organizations, every public company must adhere to Sarbanes-Oxley SEC requirements. So even if you're not a public company, taking some from the lens of Sarbanes-Oxley and applying it to your own internal control policies and internal control procedures internally, inclusive of your third-party risk management program, is a good best practice. So you should learn from it and also have that tone at the top reflected downwards so that you have complete organizational alignment on what you should be doing and what you should not be doing in your day-to-day operations. So now that we understand what tone at the top is and a regulatory lens of what it is, it's making sure that you have an understanding of how to define the roles within how to enforce tone at the top. So your organization's board of directors is responsible, as it pertains to your third-party risk management program, reviewing and approving the third-party risk management policies, approving or delegating appropriate committee reporting. You're also going to have them confirm that management takes appropriate actions or remedies any significant risk or deterioration of performance with any sort of vendors or material issues identified with vendors. And then they'll want to periodically see the reports so that they can review the health and effectiveness of the overall third-party risk management program for their organization that they're the board of directors on. So having that tone at the top is key, and having those reports are key so that the board can be effective in the decisions that they help empower and make. From a senior leadership standpoint, where tone at the top approach becomes relevant is that having a conduit so that you have managers who can effectively escalate issues to the board and communicate issues to the board immediately based upon the findings of third-party risk management reporting is a critical lens, and again helps to enforce this nature of tone at the top. And then it also helps create a structure in terms of how to execute and making sure that there are enough resources, making sure that there's budget available to be invested in your third-party risk management program and the reporting needs, making sure that there's expertise available, and then confirming that all of the things that you do from a third-party risk management practice and procedure element is consistent with how the program policies are defined and consistent with best governance in terms of how either the board wants to drive this or even how management wants to continue to execute this for your growing organization. So how do the board and senior leadership set the tone at the top? So obviously the board of directors approved the policy from what you define on a third-party risk management basis. They delegate responsibility for the reviews, but they want to hold senior leadership and other team members accountable for executing on this program and obviously provide any sort of high-level guidance and changes in terms of governance structure. While senior leadership really are the champions of the program, they enforce everything in between on third-party risk management. They're obviously monitoring the proper execution of it with the internal resources that you all may have. And then they're providing the necessary resources and resource allocation to make sure that third-party risk management programs are effectively put forth and executed upon. So you may be asking as a small business or as a new business, what should I do if I don't have a board of directors? So the quick answer is don't wait to get started. Obviously, third-party risk management programs do not have to be perfect. They just need to be consistent and they need to continue to be improved on a regular basis. So if you don't have a board of directors, your management team, your owners, or others can be critical constituents that help set that tone at the top and help define that strategy, that mission, and that overall governance. So just because you may not have a board of directors because either you're a small business or you're a newly formed business does not mean you don't have to do third-party risk management reporting. And certainly it doesn't mean that the tone of the top still cannot exist because you still have leadership, you still have executives. So consider that. So with that, we'll go into the first poll question of the day. Jesse, go ahead and take it away.
And this brings us to the first poll question of the day. You should see the poll question now in the slides area. If you have any issues, please feel free to send us a message using the Ask Question widget, and we'll be happy to assist. As a reminder, if you wish to receive the CPE credit for today's session, you must answer all poll questions and be in attendance for the entire live session. This poll question is, do you have an annual reporting and internal governance calendar and checkpoints in place? Yes, no, other, or not sure? Robin, we have some time now to answer a question from the audience. And this question is, who in the organization leads or should lead third-party risk management reporting?
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you all for joining and for the thoughtful question. The short answer to this question is it depends, and it really depends on the size and sophistication of your organization. So if you have a dedicated risk management team, a compliance team, or a governance team, oftentimes it will be a personnel or set of personnel within that organization or that function. It could be a manager, it could be an analyst, it could be the VP of risk management or third-party risk management if you have those dedicated roles. But if you're a smaller organization or you don't necessarily have a dedicated team, or you're an organization that has folks that wear many hats across the organization, it can often be an executive or individual who is in the information security department or even in the technology department if you're dealing with a lot of tech vendors that you're trying to do risk management on. So keep that in mind as you continue to scale or as you're setting up your reporting processes that we're talking through today, that it really just depends on the size and sophistication of your own internal organization and whether or not you have dedicated resources or dedicated budget to allocate to those said resources. Back over to you, Jesse.
Thanks, everyone, for answering that poll question. Here are the results. By the way, you may have noticed reactions such as a thumbs up or heart coming across the screen. If you find this feature distracting, you can turn it off by clicking the 4 arrows in the top right-hand corner of the slides widget, which will expand the slides to full screen and no longer show the reactions. Before we move on, as a reminder, in the related content widget, you will find our How to Develop Metrics in Your Third-Party Risk Management Program infographic. As Raman just discussed different reporting metrics, be sure to check out this resource. And with that, I'll hand it back to Raman.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you all for that. So reporting to the board and senior leadership. So effective communication, obviously, in terms of what reporting is not just giving reports, but also making sure that they're actively involved as needed on third-party risk management activities. So to accomplish this objective, you need to think about how to convey and strategize the key information to your senior leadership team and to the board. And we'll dive into how to do those. So you first want to make sure that all of your information is reported on from an accurate and timely basis. So accurate, making sure that your data provided is validated and true and complete, and then timely in making sure that it's scheduled in a way that's provided on time and covers the same reporting period. So as a best practice, making sure that you establish a reporting cadence where your data and your reporting is delivered to the risk committee first before it is prepared for the board is a good best practice to make sure you're catching things and making sure you're correcting for any errors to ensure that accuracy, but also, again, allowing them to act on timely data. You also want to make sure that your reporting to the board and senior leadership is digestible and accessible. So today's boards may have hundreds of different documents. They are sitting on multiple boards. They have very many things to do. So ensuring that you can give them executive summaries, ensuring that you get to the point and the so what of everything you give to them is a key part of making sure that your third-party risk management reporting is up to snuff and adequate, and then making sure that it's accessible. So whether you have a software system or you have reports or some sort of presentation, noting and tracing back your work and obviously having that audit trail is not only important for your exams and audits, but also for the questions that may arise from your board and senior leadership so that you can adequately give them where this data came from and where your risk ratings were derived. So some key ways on how to think about effectively communicating with some of these key stakeholders. So the reporting is not just for the board of directors or senior leadership, but it's also important to other key stakeholders. So what you want to do is make sure you want to provide data points that are relevant to the specific stakeholders' data needs. So think about the adage of less is more here. You also want to make sure that using data points to show trends over time is a good idea, because having reference as to how risk ratings have either improved or degraded, it can be a guidepost to how a stakeholder may want to give you advice on a next step with a vendor relationship. And then you also want to make sure that when you're identifying an issue, either a new or emerging risk, some sort of gap, you want to go through the following pieces of information: the situation, the status, the contributing factors, the potential impacts that it may have on your organization, the potential mitigants or solutions that you have, and then the desired actions of what you are going to drive forth based upon these results. So as mentioned, a key way to get there is providing and performing executive summaries. So we view these as essential in that it helps summarize the key information and the findings of your third-party risk management actions and due diligence actions that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So keeping your executive summary tight, meaning 1 page or less of findings if possible, to key stakeholders like your board of directors and senior leadership is key. And that it really helps distill the data points in an easy to understand narrative and easy to understand language for everyone to understand where there's risk and where there needs to be mitigants and actions to be put forth. So with that, we'll go into the second poll question of the day. Jesse, go ahead and take it away.
Our second poll question of the day: how many vendors do you have in your total base or inventory? Greater than 100, between 50 and 99, between 10 and 49, less than 10, or not sure? Raman, I have another question from the audience that we can answer. And this question is: should I require my critical vendors to provide copies of their internal third-party risk management reporting?
Great question. Thank you again, Jesse, for reading that out. Yes, I think you can get some further insight into your critical vendor's risk posture by understanding if they are doing good risk management or best practices across some of their governance and compliance structures. So it would be a best practice in certain circumstances to ask critical vendors to get a head start on your reviews and your due diligence to see if they have already mitigated or put internal controls in place on identified risk across their own program and what they obviously report on to their governance structure and their board of directors. Even in lieu of receiving this type of information from the vendors, you can still perform adequate due diligence on your own time to arrive at your own third-party risk management reports that you ultimately use in your day-to-day tasks and your cadence that you report on. So even though it's a best practice and can give you a head start by getting access to their reporting, it oftentimes can be alleviated by just doing your own internal control reviews, your own due diligence, and your own oversight over your vendors, and getting to your independent readouts that will inform your reporting to your governance structure instead of necessarily asking for every vendor, or in this case, every critical vendor's reports right out the gate. So there's multiple ways to get to the same end result. It certainly would get you there faster if you got a head start on it. Back over to you, Jesse.
Okay, here are the results. Thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to answer the poll. In the related content widget, you can find our How to Get Support for Third-Party Risk Management, Setting the Tone from the Top with the Board and Senior Management infographic. Raman, back to you.
So cadence is a key variable, as we've discussed. So when you think about performing monthly reports to senior leadership or your risk committee, you'll want to focus on some of the suggested content here. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but gives you a representative set of key things to focus on within your monthly reports to your senior leadership or your risk committees. Focusing on things like the executive summary reviews, the critical vendor information, how things have changed, status and where you sit within certain reviews and updating those, and then any sort of open issues as well as upcoming deadlines or any sort of known or to be understood regulatory news and changes. You'll want to also, when you're performing these monthly reviews with your senior leadership and risk committee from a reporting perspective, you want to keep in mind that the senior leadership is accountable for effectuating the third-party risk management program across the organization. So when you report to them, you want to give them some sort of consistent metrics and making sure you understand your program health. And you'll want to use this regular reporting to indicate where you need some sort of course correction or where you may suggest some improvements to the organization's third-party risk management program based upon new or emerging risks that are out there in the market. When you're performing quarterly board or senior leadership reporting, you'll want to focus again on these various suggested content areas and then provide a summary overview of your third-party risk management program. So from critical third-party details and again, executive summary reviews, those you'll see are consistent across the board because they are best practices. And then you'll want to, in this case, focus on things like exiting commercial relationships with critical vendors if they are relevant and why you arrived at that result and how you're performing against your annual timelines given that you're getting closer to the annual cadence. Overall, it's also good to give your board and your senior leadership high-level context on your inventory of vendors and third parties by risk tier, and then how you're complying to your program needs and your program definitions. From a quarterly cadence and reporting perspective, you should follow the same format each time. You should add any new narrative around any new data that you're using or issues you are reporting on. And then you'll want to make sure that this covers any number of subjects around materiality. So if it's highly material, you should work to cover it. If you view it as immaterial, you should incorporate it in your monthly, but maybe not so much in your quarterly reports, just given where the topic of conversation and the agenda items would be on these less frequent reports. And then finally, from an annual cadence perspective, you'll want to take all of the elements of your quarterly reporting structure, but do it on an annual basis in this case. Again, focusing on things like your executive summary, your key material program changes, your vendor-based changes from a materiality threshold, and then also understanding, again, the trends. So as we talked about, having multiple years or multiple positions on a vendor relationship or risk ratings is important, specifically in this annual basis, because it gives folks guideposts in terms of where things sit overall. Some things to keep in mind on the annual reporting is that you should enable your board's awareness and understanding of any of these material issues, your capacity internally, any sort of budget requirements you may need if you're inadequately equipped to service and continue to execute on your governance program and your third-party risk management program. And then also making sure that if there are any sort of issues, such as changing your policies or procedures, you want to highlight them in your executive summaries of your third-party risk management program reporting and ensuring that your board of directors and your other key stakeholders are all on the same page on these matters. So you may be spinning and asking, well, you've given me monthly, quarterly, annual best practices and what I need to be aware of, but how do I think about now what I need to be doing in each of these and which one should I perform and what's best practice? So from just a simple high-level approach, all of the above is a good answer, but making sure that you have again, specific things that you're reporting on that are unique, but even sometimes repetitive within each of these helps enforce this consistency that we talked about within your third-party risk management program. So from a monthly basis, it's good to report on any new or emerging risks so that everyone is on the same page as things arise. As you continue through the year, you'll get a really fresh perspective month to month on these items and ultimately land at a spot that provides you and your team with the necessary components to act and weigh the risks that have been identified against each other. On a quarterly basis, you'll want to focus on the status of your annual risk reviews and then also just double-click into performance levels on vendors. This is an appropriate time to think about reviewing your contracts with these vendors and whether or not you need to renew or change the contract or even exit the contract as needed. And then finally, the annual reports should be very comprehensive, but should highlight some of the challenges and successes you've had in your program. And then again, try to tailor it to understand what your budget needs are if you need any changes in that and what your program changes may be and your suggestions on that. So keep these all in mind as you're thinking about what you're doing from a third-party risk management program reporting cadence across the 3 common flows. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jesse for the final poll question of the day. Jesse?
And our third and final poll question of the day is, what type of system or services do you utilize for your third-party risk management reporting? A software platform, outsourced services provider, consultant, in-house staff, none of the above, or not sure? Raman, let's answer one more question from the audience. And that question is, I have less than 10 vendor relationships. Should I still do third-party risk management reporting?
Another great question. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you all for this. The answer is yes. So regardless of how many vendors you may have, it's always great to have governance in place and proper reporting in place because risk is not necessarily tied to the number of vendors you have. It's tied to the criticality and the magnitude of any one vendor that can pose on your organization. So even if you have one vendor, having a good insight into their risk postures and their risk management and your oversight into their posture and risk management based on your due diligence and oversight is extremely important. So short answer to the question is yes. You may have less arduous or less detailed needs from the perspective of having to report a little bit more infrequently or report in a little bit more of a logical format that meets the needs of your organization that's scaling or that maybe is a bit more immature from where you are from a staffing perspective, tooling perspective, and everything in between. But nevertheless, you shouldn't let the vendor count necessarily override what you're doing on your risk management procedure as it pertains to maintaining vendor relationships, entering and exiting vendor relationships. Keep that in mind, whether you're a small business or a large business that's dealing with a subset of vendors. Back over to you, Jesse.
And here are those results. Thank you, everyone, for answering this question. Before continuing, I would like to mention that we have our How to Report Third-Party Risk Management Activity to the Board Toolkit available for download in the related content widget. This is a great toolkit to grab as it contains an ebook, infographics, PowerPoint examples, and templates to use. Let's continue with the presentation. Back to you, Raman.
So this final section will just summarize some key best practices from third-party risk management program, and then we'll end with some key takeaways for you all to take back to your organization. So reporting is a regulatory requirement, as you know, and then making sure that you're doing it internally is a great best practice and good internal control and good governance to make sure that everybody is on the same page as it pertains to executing upon the vision of the board of directors and the owners, as well as making sure you're staying up to snuff to avoid any sort of operational risks and disasters within your vendor base. So from a perspective of some best practices to consider for your reporting, keep it consistent and keep it simple. Agree on a meeting schedule and cadence. Remember, setting formal meetings typically will need to have formal minutes so that you can document that audit trail and the key findings. You want to set clear and concise guidelines, and you also want to streamline your presentation, again, using things like executive summaries, key takeaways, using trend analysis so that everybody's speaking on the same page and on the same wavelength. So on the first part of the best practices, keeping it consistent and keeping it simple, it's important to make sure that your board's job is as easy as possible as it pertains to your third-party risk management reporting readouts and your program requirements. So making sure you come up with a consistent format that everyone can navigate with ease is important. So again, these people that are on your board aren't in the day-to-day. They aren't in the proverbial weeds of your organization, dealing with these vendor relationships, dealing with these risk reviews and everything in between. And they may not have a full appreciation for everything that you do as the task manager or as the vendor owner. So as such, making sure that you have templates, making sure that those templates are consistently applied can be a nice way for you and your organization to not only drive efficiency in your program actions, but making sure that your board is aware of everything that's coming up and also that you've seen and executed upon. It's also important because it helps validate the need of a third-party risk management team. So especially in tight times where budgets are getting tighter and third-party risk management teams are being put on a budget cycle, you may justify the need of your team and your organization to be able to continue being an employee or continuing to be as large of a budget decision if you can justifiably point to the key results that you've done. So pro tip for you all, if you don't have a standard reporting template, create one for your program. Ask your senior leadership team for direction on what to present and how to present it, and then they'll guide you on how to direct your internal reporting requirements and the details therein. That second best practice, agreeing on a meeting schedule, is another one that you want to make sure that you work hand in hand with your board and your senior leadership on as a third-party risk management program leader or team member. So you should be presenting to your board and to a committee of the board on a regular basis to ensure that you're not only a high-functioning organization, but you're one that has good governance. So when you do meet with them, as mentioned, you will have these formal meetings, which will have minutes that you'll have, and those show really well to auditors and examiners, or even just generally from a governance structure, help to memorialize key decisions that have been made or key issues that have been identified. So find out and define the normal dates and times of board meetings and meetings you'll want to convey some of the third-party risk management reporting on, and then maybe create a couple slides or create some summaries on your internal program. But then when you're meeting with, in terms of those board meetings, but when you're meeting with your risk committees, you can do that on a more frequent basis. So it could be monthly or quarterly. And you should, again, focus on those topics that we talked about in the prior section around what to focus on monthly versus quarterly. A pro tip for you all in this area is making sure you have a committee that meets at least quarterly on these particular areas, and then report on these contents of those meetings to the board, and their formal board meetings is important. So again, you'll want to do regular meetings with your committees. It could be as frequent as monthly or quarterly. Quarterly is usually a good enough cadence for those committee meetings. And then on your board meetings, you'll want to take the summaries of those risk committee meetings and convey that to the rest of the board in some form or fashion to maintain that proper governance structure. So documentation. So we talked about the documentation of what third-party risk management reporting is broadly, but also documentation of where you are from your meeting minutes and also what you're seeing in the results of your meetings with risk committees and also with other committees or even individuals in your third-party risk management program that are acting on things day to day. So it's good to remember that when you have formal meetings, you should always have formal minutes and traceability and an audit trail on everything in between. So every board meeting and every meeting of a committee of a board should have and will have a formal set of minutes for each meeting. This doesn't capture everything, but at least gives you the relevant summary and the information. Again, almost like an executive summary on your vendor relationships that you present to your board and to your senior leadership. These minutes are akin to that. So keep this in mind and making sure that the topics of what you present, the agendas, and the content therein is all going to be documented, even if it's in a summarized fashion. So pro tip for you all, on documentation is ensuring that your third-party risk management program is captured accurately in any meetings, and making sure that you're not presenting any sort of erroneous data or incomplete data, because regulators will want to see evidence when they're discussing your program efficacy and looking at these meeting minutes. So having that will avoid any sort of additional context you'll have to provide to those said regulators or examiners. As it pertains to your guidelines and another best practice, making sure you're setting clear and concise guidelines is another key emphasis point for your third-party risk management reporting needs. So it's good to spell out what you're doing internally and the reporting schedule and the content therein you're covering in your third-party risk management program documents. So having a regularly updated internal document that everybody is aware of, everybody understands, and everybody is working towards achieving and attaining is important. This could be as simple as making sure you define key terms of what due diligence is for your organization, who's involved in key areas of the third-party risk management program, when certain collaborators get involved versus other team members internally, how you report on things, what are the key metrics and the key performance indicators, those KPIs that you want to report upon, and then making sure that they're properly communicated across your organization on a regular basis, and then properly updated when there's new information, either from a regulatory standpoint or just from an internal governance standpoint, is critical. So pro tip for you all, having everything laid out in governance documents means everyone knows the guidelines and there can be no pushback or gray areas, right? So with risk, you typically want to make sure that you are buttoned up, and you want to make sure you're as defined as possible, because it will help avoid any sort of issues that may arise in the future if, again, an examiner question comes up, or if it turns into a he said, she said, or an area where there's a lot of gray areas between your different constituents in your programs. And then the final best practice we mentioned around streamlining your presentation can essentially get you to what you need to convey and how to convey it. So again, we talked a lot about executive summaries, but making sure that you're providing accurate, timely, relevant, and complete information on your third-party reporting is important to key constituents like your board of directors and senior leadership, because it ultimately will help them drive strategic action and tactical action for your business and organization. So having things buttoned up from a presentation perspective and making sure that it's fully streamlined, but it still has a layer of comprehensive and that audit trail, as we've talked about many times, is extremely critical, because it will allow folks to make decisions off of the key takeaways, and then also effectively provide you a very bulletproof nature of where your program oversight requirements and everything in between are. So essentially, you can go to an auditor or an examiner and show them everything you've done in between, and that it matches your internal policies and programs in place. So pro tip for you all, when you're doing board reporting, and especially when it's done well, it not only can help satisfy those regulatory expectations as mentioned, but it also helps protect your organization from an operational risk, reputational risk perspective, limiting disruptions, and everything in between. So keep these all in mind. So in summary, just wanted to end today's presentation with some key takeaways on the content that we walked through over the prior 40 plus slides. So hopefully this was all helpful to you, but just to leave you with this. TPRM reporting is cross-collaborative, as we talked about the who. There's many people involved in it. So it's great to make sure that you understand who everyone is and who where the responsibilities sit within the who. It's also good to take away that you should always start with some simplicity and then build from there. So again, if you're a small business or even a large organization that has a multinational presence, always start with something simple, and simple is better than nothing, and then build from there. You also want to make sure that regardless of your vendor base size, the best practice is to use the third-party risk management reporting for proper governance. So even if you have 5, 10, or 20 vendors or 2,000 vendors, having good third-party risk management practices and obviously reporting is critical for both sides of those spectrums in terms of vendor size. And then you'll want to focus on the findings and key risks, then build mitigants and work to address them. So again, streamlining presentations, executive summaries are critical here. And then finally, you'll want to create a feedback loop to improve your contracting, your SLA process with your vendors, and other areas of your operation based upon your reports. So this is the so what. So you did all your reporting, now what do you do? So you have to make sure you effectuate contractual language changes and begin to enforce different parts of your program findings with your vendor relationships so that it ultimately helps mitigate risk to your business. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jesse with some concluding remarks, but it's a pleasure speaking with you all and look forward to answering more of your questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Raman. Before we dive into more questions and answers, I would like to thank everyone for attending. I would also like to thank Raman for his time and sharing some important information. On your screen now, you will see our upcoming webinars. On July 11th, our Vendor Onboarding, Starting Vendor Relationships Right webinar. And on July 23rd, our Vendor Exit Strategies and Plans, Managing the Offboarding Process Safely and Effectively webinar. We hope you will be able to join us for those sessions. A link to register for those is in your copy of today's presentation slide. Let's now go ahead and answer some more questions that have come in during this session. Okay, Raman, our next question is, how often should we perform third-party risk management reporting in our program?
Thanks, Jesse, and thank you everyone for joining again and for this question. So as we talked about today, there's various cadences you can utilize. So having a defined and a predefined approach on your monthly reports, your quarterly reports, as well as your annual reports are best practices and oftentimes can help get ahead of some of the exam or audit questions if you are part of the regulated bodies or have oversight from the regulated bodies, especially if you're a bank or credit union or a financial institution in the United States. But at a minimum, again, if you're strapped on time, strapped on resources, I've seen some questions from the audience today around resourcing about part-time folks and everything in between. You should be doing things on an annual cadence and at least reporting on that internally just for good hygiene, good program compliance, and making sure that you're doing everything up to snuff so that you don't have any sort of operational hiccups or risks introduced to your operations, which even beyond the regulatory check-the-box exercise is very important for every business.
Great. Our next question. Who are you typically reporting to based on your third-party risk management program and its results?
Yeah, so there's the internal stakeholders, and we talked about this at length in various parts of our presentation today. So your internal stakeholders are folks like your management team members, the executives, different cross-functional departments. I saw a question earlier about, your finance and accounting department not cooperating around certain things in your internal program. So there's definitely those stakeholders and those employees and those cross-collaborators you'll be reporting to. But then beyond that, externally, you're obviously going to be reporting to folks like the examiners or auditors or anyone in between that has any sort of regulatory oversight into you. So that is a big piece of those external stakeholders. If you're a public company, you obviously have the SEC in the United States or the corresponding international bodies that oversee public company reporting that you'll have to have some oversight into. There's also been some evolving reporting around new domains, risk domains like ESG and other areas that will have bodies or potentially have some oversight into others. You might have to also report to your lenders if you have debt on some of this program management. So it's essentially folks that have either purview ownership of your business from an external standpoint or may have some sort of financing like an equity holder or a debt holder in your business you're typically reporting to beyond any of those regulatory agencies. So just keep those in mind and again, use some of the best practices and tips we suggested throughout this presentation today on how to present executive summaries versus more detailed approaches when and if asked. Back over to you, Jesse.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Next question here. Is reporting only required or suggested for me if I am highly regulated or examined by an external body?
Yeah, that's another good question. So again, from what you all are doing from a best practices perspective, and I know some folks have asked this question a few times around, should we do it for regulation to check the box, or should we do it as an internal control and best practice? Again, third-party risk management, although obviously if you have regulatory agencies or guidance that makes it a requirement, is a best practice and should exist, because if you have vendor risk that ultimately leads to a breach or some sort of exposure that puts your business or some sort of disruption at a vendor or some sort of disaster at the vendor that then causes risk exposure to your operations, it doesn't matter if you're regulated. You should look into this just as a best practice and frankly as a requirement of just operating in this new digital world that we're in. So I think what the COVID pandemic really put forth in this type of realm in specific is increasingly even hard good companies that may have been more supply chain oriented and not necessarily digitally oriented are still have a ton of risk exposure to things like cyber breaches, data breaches, privacy control around information being transmitted in the digital sphere, whether that be through email, through some sort of contracts being uploaded to a software system. So the short end of it is, regardless of whether or not you have regulatory oversight or you're regulated or not, you should be performing reporting. You should be obviously performing your oversight tasks, performing your third-party risk management workflows with your resource allocation and highest and best use of time, as it allows. If you're wearing many hats in your org, you may not be able to do all the things that a larger company that has dedicated resources in this sphere can do. But again, at a minimum, to simplify the approach, focus on your critical vendors, the ones that may have the most disruption to your organization, and make sure that you're at least getting an understanding of whether or not they have certain risks that need to be mitigated and how you can approach them if and when those risks actually come to be. Hope that helps. Back over to you, Jesse.
Great. I think we have time for one more very quick question. What are some simple places to report on or start with if I am new to third-party risk management reporting?
Yeah, and hopefully this is a good question to end on. But really, I think, again, as we've emphasized today, and I've responded to, I think, a couple questions already, I think starting, and as I just actually alluded to on my prior response, starting with really those critical vendors and those ones that would have the highest impact on your organization is the most important. So again, if you're strapped for time or resources, or you're just getting started and you don't know where to start, a simple way to attack this is even just from a dollar basis, how much you pay a specific vendor could be, pulling a list of your accounts payable or your cash flow or outflows to specific vendors, or maybe where the vendor has the most sensitive information for your business or the most critical information for your business beyond that quantitative value. Starting there would be key, and again, will help at least get you started in terms of the due diligence you need to perform, the oversight tasks, the questions you need to be asking the said vendors, the types of information you can review on them and how it factors into your own internal compliance, your own reporting, your own day-to-day workflows, and then how that kind of rolls into your quarterly workflows to your board and your management team, your annual reporting workflows to your board, your management team, and others. So start with what you deem to be the most critical to your organization. That could be who you pay, vendors that you pay the most, or vendors that ultimately hold the most sensitive or key information for your business that, if disrupted, would otherwise be and maybe not catastrophic, but would be critical to your organization's performance and operating obligations. So hopefully, again, that helps. Thanks,
Thanks,
Jesse.
Raman. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have left for questions today. Thanks again, Raman, for taking the time to address some of those that came in. Any questions we did not have time to answer today, we will address offline. We would like to thank you all for attending and hope you found today's session valuable. Another big thank you to Raman for his time and content. You can ask even more questions inside of our third-party think tank, an online community that is dedicated to third-party risk professionals and free to join. Just because today's session has ended doesn't mean the conversations and questions must. Post your questions at thirdpartythinktank.com and see what your peers have to say. In the community, you'll find thousands of free educational resources, including ones related to third-party risk management reporting. If you would like to become a member of Third Party Think Tank, you can register on the site or shoot us an email and we'll get you registered and send you a link to set your password. We did record today's session, and that recording link will be provided to you in a follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow afternoon. Also in the follow-up email will be the survey link for you to request the CPE credit. On behalf of InMinder, it has been a pleasure. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.